Welcome to Bible study. This week is Reformation Sunday, so you can see the red pyramids up behind me. We are looking at 1 Samuel chapter 23 and at Psalm number 54 this week. So if you want to grab your Bible and have that handy, that might be helpful. As we peruse our way through this, we're going to want to look at a couple of interesting details that are going to show up in this story and as it connects to this psalm. But really, to get what's happening in Proverbs, in 1 Samuel chapter 23, we need to back up to the beginning of chapter 22, because there's a little factotum we skipped over last time. It says that David, after he had fled from Saul and after he had fled from Gath, where remember he had pretended to be insane, it says David left there at the beginning of chapter 22. He left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. David is in this initial phase of his ascent into power, is going to look an awful lot like a character we know rather well, and of course that would be Robin Hood. He is going to gather about him a band of people who are, as it says, the debtors, the discontent, the people who are in trouble, who are in distress. It's an outlaw band. And they all gather and form themselves around David. The other important and actually essential fact is that his family comes down too. Because in the ancient world, you were so embedded into your family. You were part of that community in a very interesting way that we don't really get. I mean, we live all over the country. I have siblings spread all over this continent. Not so with these people. They were very much part of that. And that was one of the ways that we know that ancient people controlled their enemies, is that they would seize their family. David's family has come down to him in the wilderness. And the very next paragraph is very interesting what David does. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. He said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come to you until I know what God will do for me." He left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Leave and go into the land of Judah." So David left and went into the forest of Hereth. So David has taken care of his parents. His father and mother are safe in the court or in the palace of the king of Moab. And by the way, that Moabite connection is going to play out later on in the story. There's a very good reason why David may have gone to the king of Moab. And that is because his great-grandmother was Ruth. And if you remember from the story, Ruth is a Moabitess. She is from Moab. He is actually part Moabite. And so he goes back there, maybe plays on his connections through family to some people who are there, and gets a safe place for his mother and father to be while this unsettled situation with David and King Saul is sorting itself out. His brothers, it appears, come down and stand with him. They are on his side. Then we get, of course, the terrible story of Ahimelech and the priests of Nob and Doeg killing all of them, and that's what we talked about last week. We pick it up in chapter 23. Now we don't know who they are, they told David, "The Philistines are fighting against Keilah, a village in the southern and western part of Judah. And they are robbing the threshing floors. That means they're coming in just as the grain is harvested, just as they have separated the wheat from the chaff. You've got this resource of grain that you're going to eat for the next months until the next harvest comes in, and that's when the Philistines are coming and snatching it away, leaving people in desperate situation. David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" So David's band of merry men are going, "Dave, we don't want to do this. This is scary. This is going to be dangerous." And then David inquired of the Lord again. The Lord answered him, "Yes, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, brought away their livestock, and dealt them a heavy defeat. Thus David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. And so here we see David in this kind of Robin Hood-like role. He is rescuing the people. Saul is not doing it. Saul the king is failing his own people. But David is assuming some of the role, the responsibility of the king. But the other element that gets put in here is, notice he's inquiring of the Lord. He can do that now because remember, after the priests of Nob were killed, the one surviving priest ran away to David, and that is Abiathar. And so Abiathar is present, presumably with his linen ephod, the symbol of his office, and also the tools of his office. And one of the things that the priest was supposed to do was to manipulate these two stones called the Urim and the Thummim. And we don't quite know how they worked, but it's something like a coin toss. And it was a form of divination. And they would ask questions of God, and they would seek answers of God, and they would throw this stone or somehow manipulate the stone, and it would give them the answer that they were, to the question they were asking. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he came down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told to Saul that David had gone down to Keilah, that he had done this, and that he had shut himself up inside the city. God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. I've got him trapped, says Saul. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him, he said to the priest Abiathar, "Bring the ephod." David said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul has come down to Keilah to destroy the city on my account." And now he says, "Will Saul come down?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he will." "Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand?" And he says, "Yes, they will." Then David and his men, who now were about 600, so his group has grown, set out and left Keilah and wandered wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the stronghold in the wilderness, and this is a fortress-like hill where he is able to set up camp, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but the Lord did not give him into his hand. And so again, for these people who are in exile, this is going to feel familiar. They are feeling rootless and homeless. They're moved around. You know, these people were very, very much situated in place. Again, modern culture doesn't really help us to understand what they're feeling right now, because so often we don't necessarily associate our home with a physical, geographic place. Our home is oftentimes where our family is, and that could move. I might move from one community to another and say I've had homes here and here and here. In the ancient world, people had a home. It was where their fathers, their grandfathers, those people were buried. And that was incredibly important to them. David is now in the wilderness of Ziph. And here's where our psalm is going to come in. When they heard, the people at Horesh, when David heard that Saul had come out to seek his life, then Saul's son Jonathan comes and sought him out. And there he strengthened his hand through the Lord. Does that mean he gave him resources? Does that mean he simply blessed him? He said to him, "Do not be afraid, for the hand of my father Saul shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel." Notice, this is the crown prince saying this. "And I shall be second to you. My father Saul also knows this." When the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, David remained at Horesh. Jonathan goes home. So you have this exemplar of this friendship that Jonathan was admitting that he is not going to be king. At best, he's going to be prime minister, the second in command. David is going to be the next king. And Jonathan says, "I know that." They make a covenant, a promise to each other, to honor each other. They part ways. It's one of the last times they're going to see each other. But then you get the Ziphites. And the Ziphites are fellow members of the tribe of Judah with David. But they're going to betray him. Some Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Saul is hiding among us in the strongholds of Horesh," or "David is hiding among us, on the hill of Hakilah, which is south of Jeshimon. Now, O king, wherever you wish to come down, do so. And on our part, we will surrender him to the king's hand." They betray him. Saul says, "Yeah, go do it. Plan it all out. Make sure you've got an exact time and place, and I'll be there." David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah, to the south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men come down to search for him. So the Ziphites have given the king exact location. The king has come down after him. When David was told, he went down to the rock, and he stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that he had slipped past or got slipped away, Saul pursued him into the wilderness of Maon. And you get this picture that Saul is on one side of a mountain and David is on the other side of the mountain, and they're going round and round. And suddenly Saul gets a message. "Hurry, come, the Philistines have made a raid." And he has to do his kingly duty, and he has to leave. And that's why it says it's called the Rock of Escape, because by the skin of his teeth, by the narrowest of margins, David got away. He goes up from there, and he lives in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Now, again, for the people in exile, this is feeling familiar. These are people who are living under an occupation of a sort. They've been removed from their homes, but they are living as a servant people among a much more powerful people. And if you read any of your history and you read about people who are in occupied places, think of France during World War II or something like that, one of the things that always happens is you have collaborators. People who, in the interest of their own wealth, well-being, health, maybe even to save their lives, are co-opted by the occupier, by the enemy, and end up betraying and working with the people that are your enemies. And that is incredibly discouraging and distressing to people. That here's this person who should be your friend, who, like you, should be united against this enemy, but they turn. That is an amazingly awful place to be. I mean, we can see it in interpersonal relationships now when a friend betrays us. Think of what it would have been like when you're in an occupied place, And, somebody collaborates with the Nazis. And inside the Jewish communities, there were many who did, just in the interest of short-term gain. They almost all ended up back on the trains with everybody else. But there were many who betrayed their own people. And that's what the Ziphites are doing to David. They're fellow Jews, members of the tribe of Judah, and they have betrayed him to the king, who is actually of the tribe of Benjamin. And so there's a sense of, this is not right. It is when David hears that the Ziphites have betrayed him that it is said he writes the psalm we're going to look at. It's very short. It's only 7 verses. To the leader, with stringed instruments, a maskil of David, when the Ziphites went and told Saul, David is hiding among us. David writes, Save me, O God, by your name, and vindicate me by your might. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For the insolent have risen against me, the ruthless seek my life. They do not set God before them. These people are trying to kill me, God. But David sort of centers himself and takes a step back and looks at the big picture. Surely God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will repay my enemies for their evil. In your faithfulness, put an end to them. So David again, just as we noted last week, David doesn't try and attack the Ziphites. He doesn't try and take this matter into his own hands. He lets God solve this problem. Because really only God is going to be able to solve this problem for him. What does the person who has been betrayed by his own countrymen to the Babylonians or to the Nazis, what can he really do? David is encouraging them to let God handle that. But David does so in hope, and he does so with confidence. Verses 6 and 7 of our psalm, the last part. With a freewill offering I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies. Here is David standing on that hill, watching the dust of Saul's receding army marching off, now to fight against the Philistines and not to chase David into the ground. And David has been given a chance to see the blessing and the deliverance of God. If you have the opportunity, we'll talk about these two things and their interplay and how this helps us as a community deal with betrayal and disappointment and all of those things, and how this continues to be a part of the Christian response to tragedy and difficulty, as we did last week. So if you're able to make it on Sunday, we'd love to see you. If you can't and you have any questions, by all means, send me an email or get in touch with me, and we'll by all means answer them for you. God bless you.